Okay, we should be live. Yep. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the latest OriginTrail Technological AMA. I'm Branimir. I'm actually the CTO and co-founder of the company, and I'm going to be answering questions from Reddit today. And also we'll be giving a little bit of news from what we've been doing lately. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just basically run through the updates at the beginning, and then we'll continue with your questions. Actually, the most uploaded questions on Reddit that have been posted. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and essentially give you what are the news lately. So the last Tech AMA, we talked about introducing the new version of, well, actually kind of the split version of Freedom. And we've been looking into how we can get the benefits of Freedom into the network deployed faster. By the way, we've actually done quite a few tests as well as use cases with clients, which have actually showed us that we need to devote our time to additional features as well, so that we actually have some things that we planned for the future that we actually want and need to implement earlier. And that's where we actually had plans for the Gemini stage, which comes after Freedom stage of the development of the protocol. Just to briefly reiterate on what the protocol does for maybe someone who's listening in for the first time or doesn't know really that much about OriginTrail. So essentially, the protocol is intended to work on a peer-to-peer network. It is designed so that there is no central authority that governs the network, and the peer-to-peer network is basically a network of nodes run by either companies or individuals that might want to contribute to the network. These nodes contribute to actually something called the knowledge graph, and that's why in the underlying tech of the actual node data layer is something that is really based on graph logic. And graph logic is something that's important for supply chains because it actually helps with interoperability and data interconnectivity quite a lot. We've been doing some things a while ago, over 6 years ago, without using graphs, and we ended up emulating them. So that's kind of a learning for us over the years, that because we have different data sets and different data standards that govern different vendor-related systems in the supply chain. So, for example, ERP systems of Oracle or Microsoft or other companies, or just plain old Excel, which some companies use. It's really hard to get this data connected and somehow make sense out of it, actually make knowledge out of it. So the knowledge graph is there to help with that, and the underlying graph logic is something that we heavily work on. Additionally, the protocol works with blockchain to provide two things. One is the actual integrity of the knowledge graph, so that each data set that gets published on the network gets cryptographically fingerprinted on a blockchain. And when I specifically say on a blockchain, because the idea is to support many different blockchains, ideally any, the protocol is being built in a neutral fashion, therefore doesn't favorize any blockchain or any, let's say, vendor-specific technology. Any database implementation, though they all do vary and have their pros and cons. The idea is to build a system that is inclusive and therefore neutral, also in a technical sense of the term. Yes, blockchain is also incorporated into the system, not only to provide integrity to the data, but also to govern the decentralized network. So in that sense, to allow the management of relations between nodes, kind of like in a general blockchain network where nodes are part of the network because they might be rewarded for contributing, let's say, hash power in a proof of work type of a blockchain. Very similarly, in OriginTrail, everyone contributes into the network, but not by providing hash power in that sense, by really contributing to the knowledge graph. So either storing it or providing information, consistent checks on the information, and publishing, sharing information through it. And finally, there's many little moving parts around the protocol, but the idea mainly being that it enables data sharing in a decentralized way with integrity as an L2 network on top of blockchain. That means that it's really tailored for data, so it's not there to provide consensus like blockchain does, but it's really there to provide the ability to exchange information, connect it easily from different data sources, make sense out of it, and actually create this knowledge graph in the background. The knowledge graph is kind of a new term. It's very sort of related to an old term coined as the semantic web. So essentially, it's about but also relations between data, and that's where our learning from supply chains have shown is the biggest weakness when we need to bring interoperability, interconnectivity. So having all that said, giving the intro into the protocol, the freedom stage of the development introduced mechanisms that strengthen the network and introduce certain abilities such as the litigation mechanism that allows further resilience of the data in the network. But on the way of doing this, we've actually realized that not only is this an important update, but there's kind of a more sort of an update that we should prioritize more, and that was based on the actual cases that we've tried to implement. And during these pilot phases, we've seen that we are actually slowly starting to hit some limits of the actual current version of the protocol. So that's why we realized that it makes a lot of sense to consider prioritizing these cases and therefore making room for more adoption and easing the adoption in a technological sense to actually move features from the Gemini stage that were planned for later into the freedom stage. So we kind of now have something we call the Gemini freedom data layer. And that is the most important update over the last actually couple of sprints we've been doing, and we will be doing in the coming ones. And what that brings is really what you see on the slide. So it brings an extension of support so that we can actually support more use cases, and because we can support more data set types as well. The ability to actually convert one format to the other, that was something that we discovered was important to the users of the companies that use the network, and therefore have the ability to view sort of the same data from the same knowledge graph in two different formats. Also, it heavily influences the capacity. So the idea is to increase the capacity that we can actually process more supply chain events, ideally with less hardware requirements. So that is something that the team is working heavily on. And then finally, there's been quite many updates in terms of developer experience as well, so that it's actually easier to use the protocol. And for that sense, there's a completely new API implementation around the data layer of the new Gemini freedom stage. So I'll actually show, I think there was a question regarding that, so I'll show some of it a bit later. What's also coming up in the near future is the Houston update. So the idea is that once we update the protocol node to the latest version, and that once it's tested and battle proof, then the Houston update needs to follow as well. And of course, a significant documentation update, because I might say we've done a better job this time in that sense. So we have more documentation and more precise documentation. So we've been improving on that part, both because we needed it in the team, but also because we believe it's important for the community to be able to engage, and for any other service provider or company that wants to use the protocol. So therefore, that's kind of the general updates. Mostly the reason why such a shift has happened is really because we've seen the market need, and therefore, in order to facilitate more adoption and to facilitate that actually there's no blockers in implementing the cases that have been the ones that are in progress right now. The idea is to actually switch priorities around in that sense and sort of merge the phases. So we are no longer speaking about the same roadmap. And in that sense, we will be updating the roadmap very soon. So we'll publish an updated version where there's more information on what exactly that means. Though that's to come in the days to follow. I'll try to focus on the tech today, and I'll go ahead and try to answer all the questions and actually show a small demo, which I think is maybe the best to do actually right now. So before we go to the questions, I can show you what we actually have been working on. So now let's see if the share screen is gonna show. Okay, so yeah, I suppose it works. So basically what I'm gonna show is a demo of the actual new data layer. It's still in development, so it's not complete. It's not feature complete, but most of the things have been done in such a way that we can basically push forward with testing. There's a lot of things still to cover, but it's in a prototypal stage. It's functioning. So I can show you here a very simple demo of actually a local node network that's gonna perform the features that we've developed in the new data layer. So what we're seeing here is basically this is the node, and I'm gonna start 4 nodes. So this is going to be the DC node. Oh, okay, I have an issue here. Am I in the right? No, not in the right folder. Sorry for that. Okay, so let's see if it starts. Should start. Okay, taking a while. Yeah, so while this node is starting, I'm gonna start the other ones as well. So I have the command here ready. Yeah, so this one, and this one. And it'll just take a moment. So I'll just try to explain what's going on here. Basically, this is a kind of a local development network that we usually spin up every time that we actually, test out a new pre-release or release in the team. And what we usually do is we basically spin up a small network. We test out all the features, and we can actually go ahead and see them now. So I'll show this first node has just been started. Let me see if the other nodes are they're still being started. So they're actually connecting, looking for each other on the peer-to-peer network. Even though this is only on my computer, this network is still acting as a peer-to-peer network. So it takes a bit to synchronize. And while we wait to synchronize, I'll actually just load the really quickly HTML page. Something is up with my internet. Okay, so I think this should be visible. Yeah, so basically there's it's a very ugly HTML, but just to for the purposes of this demo, we basically created a file where you can target a certain node and publish a certain file to it as basically replicated network. And I have a couple of them here just for demo purposes. So let me just see if the nodes are finally up. Okay, node started, all nodes have started. So let's try. Let's see. If I publish a GS1 EPCIS XML to node 1, which I designated as the DC node, and actually I replicate. If I submit, the node starts importing this file. I receive actually a replication ID and dataset ID. So basically that's the fingerprint. And now an offer gets created on the network. By the way, I'm using the local ganache blockchain for this, so it's going to happen a bit faster than usual. But essentially, they're now going to communicate with each other and start importing, as this one is already doing. So they're all going to soon say that the replication was finished. While we look at this, one important update in the new data layer that I think is good to mention here is, and the way we actually supported multiple more data formats. The idea of having a very generic dataset format that's internal for the protocol was born, and that's why we actually created something we called OTJSON. In OTJSON, essentially, we have a very abstract sort of an abstract representation of the graph that is wrapped around in a certain format, which includes additional metadata and signatures, in order to be able to actually have any data set convert to OTJSON. It's actually loosely based on JSON-LD. And then these different OTJSON data sets can actually be connected to each other when they get turned into graphs. And the connections, actually called connectors, are there in order to validate that certain data sets are allowed to connect to each other. So if company A says, I shipped something to company B, signs it with their identity, basically, and with their private key, and says which public key of the other company, company B, expects a data set to come, and the company B does the same. So basically, vice versa. A says B will add some data to its graph, and B says that A will add some data to its graph, because of all the signatures matching and because of the expected result that both of those claims match, that A is sending something to B and B is receiving something from A, then these graphs get connected. And that's something that I can actually show in the database. So we had one offer just finished here, finalized, and because there's only 3 DH nodes, they've all been chosen for this offer. If there were more, then a certain random number of 3 would be chosen. And what's kind of really cool here is to show this connector. So I'll go ahead and do it. I'll just take import another file. And what's new in the new data layer, so we don't necessarily need to publish specific standard-based files. We can actually use an OTJSON. So I'm going to use some generic sensor data, which we can look at actually, and publish it to another node. Let's say node 2 is company B, which measured sensor data. I just sent OTGraph, which is actually the OTJSON in a way. And the second node should have now received, let's see, yeah, the import request. So yeah, have a replication ID and dataset ID back. So again, the process starts over. And what we are going to be able to see at the end is actually we can go into the graph database itself, which is a Wrangle here, and then we can literally look at the connected data. So let's do that. Let's do that. Should be here. The replication is still not done, but we can just go ahead. This is kind of a root one, and just choose one of these nodes. They're all reusing, because it's a development database, they're all reusing the same database. And essentially, we can just go to graphs. Maybe I can zoom in a bit. Just need to add a graph, let's say my graph, and then I can say, okay, LT vertices, LT vertices. So the offer is finalized in the background, which is really cool. And now let's look at the graph. So actually, this is the graph. I'm going to make it a little nicer. So we go to vertex type, and we use relation type here. Save it, just so we have a nicer view. and then we load the full graph. So basically, this is the data we got from these two files. And if I zoom in a little bit, let's say we open up a random point in the graph. For example, this was a specific identifier, actually GS1-based identifier, and it was mentioned in two different data sets. And that's part of the reason why, so first of all, this data doesn't get duplicated, and then secondly, both data sets are actually containing the same information, so they will both be connected to this identifier. And this, then I can go ahead, and this identifier basically explains, identifies a certain entity, and this is another entity object which belongs to one data set. But finally, to just show it, there are actually these connectors here. And these connectors say, okay, so I have one data set, which is basically here, and another data set, and they get connected because we expected them to be connected through these connectors. So that's a feature of the protocol. You can also see a lingering connector here, still waiting for another data set to come in. Actually, I have it ready, though we can publish it as well in the background. Let's say we publish it to a third node, and we take the certificate JSON. So that's another interesting piece of information. So let's say a certificate for a certain product gets published. So we published it to, I think, node 3. Let's see, node 2, sorry. Yeah. So this is going to happen in the background now, and the nodes are communicating. And what we will basically see once I reload the graph in the database, we're going to be able to see that this connector actually connects further. So I suggest because we will need to wait a minute or two, I'll just go ahead with the questions, and then we continue with this part of the demo. But I hope this gave a little bit more insight on how it works. We actually gave this demo to in the two of our last meetups, and it was too bad we didn't show it online before. So I'm really glad we finally did. Okay, so back to the presentation. Did I manage to close it? I think I did. Ah, no, it's here. Okay. So that's been the latest in the development. Now I'm going to go to the questions, and then we can later look at the final part of the demo. So first question, the most upvoted question was, why has the team not taken over OTHub? It costs $50 a month to run and is invaluable to network operators. So regarding these questions, we basically actually did get in touch with the founder, let's say the owner of OTHub, and we discussed how we could help bring it back up. So we're in the process of doing that, actually. By the way, a big shout out to BBNM, who's done a really great job with OTHub, and actually really felt bad to see it go down. So we're really gonna make sure that we help and have the actual OTHub deployment up and running as soon as possible. So the idea there being that we can actually get back what OTHub was very, very quickly. And apart from that, we were also looking into how we can support such community-driven efforts and projects in the future. So the idea is that we're also working on actually a new website for OriginTrail, and that website will have a community section. So we look at it as more of a systemic solution, so not just having like a one-off solution for the problem that at this point OTHub experienced. But the idea is to actually have the ability for more community members to also, in an organized way, help around the OriginTrail ecosystem, develop their own solutions, and provide, so we can then provide one single place for them that actually have exposure. So the idea is to allow pretty much the community to contribute more through the website of OriginTrail itself. Okay, when do you expect to see a dramatic increase in number of jobs in the network? Do you imagine it being this year? So this is really an adoption question again, and the adoption comes sort of has two really different angles. So one angle is the pardon me. One angle is the technical angle, and the technical angle would be how do we enable more companies to use the protocol? How does the protocol facilitate more different use cases, and how easy it is to use? So that's kind of like mostly the technical angle, and then the business angle is then the rest in terms of sharing the actual use cases in the context of the business networks and exploring possibilities there. Because we're focusing on the tech part today, I'll just go ahead and basically explain. Well, we reiterate really the path we decided to go with the new roadmap. So the new roadmap essentially focuses on exactly that, like increasing the adoption of the technology by working on the immediate issues and limits that we've seen, and that's really something which the data layer of the Freedom/Gemini stage tackles. So we can then support many more different things, and ideally also make it much easier to use, and as well as more performance. So that is where we're tackling it right now. Like I mentioned, we're also publishing actually a lot of new documentation. It's still being finalized within the team because we're about to freeze the specs for the actual data layer that we are in development. And to finalize these specs basically means that we can publish all the documentation to be in the open. So we're still working on it and testing. Basically, that's something that we decided should be our focus, because so far we haven't. We have been publishing documentation, but we have not provided, let's say, a very deep technical explanation of some elements of the data layer, and that therefore I also wanted to show some of it, how it works today, but also the new documentation will really reflect this. So you'll be able to dive super deep and give us not only comments and feedback, but also, I hope, improvement proposals, because I'm sure there are also ways to improve it beyond the ways we figured out that the data layer should work like. Okay, so to continue on to the next question. Okay, is nOS+Bittrex integration still on track for Q3, which would be the end of this month, like it was set to be in the last AMA? I believe, and I'm sorry for actually having the bit of a misunderstanding regarding this launch date. So we, in the last AMA, we presented how we actually want to do it. So as a technical sequence diagram of how this integration should work with Bittrex, but we did not mention the launch date yet, and I understand everyone would like to know more about it, but unfortunately we just cannot commit to a certain date. We're really focusing on adoption in that sense, and that because it's in this moment for companies and for the actual users of the protocol, in that sense, more important to focus on expanding the data layer. We're really deep in focus regarding that. In terms of the integration with Bittrex, that's one of the things that really is important for adoption, and basically is something that we are trying to figure out the exact timetable yet, but it's in progress. We have designed the solution. It's not fully implemented yet, but it's in development. And that means there's really two preconditions. One is to finish the data layer and release the new version of the protocol. The second precondition is actually that in order for this to make business sense, nOS needs to be launched as a software as a service platform. So which currently it's still not fully. So in that sense, we are. That's also something that we will be mentioning in the new roadmap. But essentially, doing these two things will then open up the ability for companies to come register, use nOS as a software as a service, use the new data layer underneath when the update is out, and then directly connect to the actual integration with Bittrex. So that comes after these two. Okay, so next one. When new companies are onboarded to the ODN, do they have access to SDKs for the most popular common languages, so each new company doesn't have to write bespoke code to use the API? As an alternative to an official SDK, have looked into technology such as Swagger. This would enable others to use code generation tools for their specific language for API. I saw this online, which looks like something that might be compatible. Actually, we, as part of this new documentation, we also included Swagger. So that's a very good point. The question is completely on point, and I can actually show the current version of Swagger. Let's see if it will work like this. Yeah, works. So this is the new data layer API, and essentially we already have it in Swagger. So what's kind of new, and for the ones who are into development a bit more, you can actually notice that we introduced versioning, and that also for each of these API calls, there's quite a few important updates. For example, the import call is from the new implementation is a non-blocking call. Basically, all of them. We have an export call, which is something that was not available before. So export meaning that I can ask the node if it can export a certain data set in a certain format that I would like. So let's say I could import a JSON LD and maybe export Web of Things JSON, if that's something that's possible, depending on the data and on the data standards that can sometimes be done. The idea there being that also some data which comes, an arbitrary data set coming from the graph, or maybe a graph traversal, can also be formulated as, let's say, a GS1 EPCIS file. So that's also another thing that is the idea. So the export route is another one, and then there is a couple of new interesting routes. Also, the ones that will show the supported standards in certain version. So yeah, to answer the question, finally, very good point. Swagger is something that is going to be up, and this is going to be extended by the rest of the API. But essentially, that is something that the team is already working on, and part of the documentation effort I already mentioned. So thanks for the question. I hope that this answers it. I go further to the next one. Okay, are there any other technical challenges or improvements that need to be overcome to have the freedom release on mainnet? Well, in a way, I mentioned all this already. We are working on finalizing what I've just demonstrated, the new data layer, to integrate that part from Gemini basically into Freedom, the stages. And then after we do all the stress tests and performance tests, we don't see any more technical challenges in that sense. So those are the immediate challenges right now. And having this said, we really try to focus on having the development be driven by the needs of the businesses. So that means that there's quite a few things to explore, especially in the world of DLT technologies, where we could potentially improve on the protocol, or just open up new things that can be done with it. But at this current time, we really try to have focus on what has already been validated as a need, and make sure that we solve the obvious problems that the businesses have first. So therefore, these are the main challenges we've seen so far, and that's why we're focusing on them, so that finally the technology is not just something sitting on some GitHub somewhere, and not being used, but actually being used by businesses that are actually asking for the technology to solve the problems that they have. Okay. What are the plans about handling gas for payouts, since single payouts are so expensive? Is there any plan to explore some way to do bulk payouts, i.e. weekly, using one transaction rather than payouts for each individual job? Yes, that is a very, very good point, and that's something that we're also working on. So the idea is to optimize and actually minimize the number of transactions needed for both DC and DH nodes. So the team is monitoring all these costs, and the idea in the development of the new versions of the protocol is to provide features that we can do. We can have less of the cost, so and for the same features. So yeah, this is a very fair point, and that's something that we're looking into and are definitely going to be working on in the next sprints. So very, very sensible question. Okay. Has the Bittrex integration been used by any organic clients yet? As in, have any OT customers purchased trace through that system yet? What are your thoughts on building some sort of an app or program that, that layman users can download that will make running nodes a seamless and pain-free operation, like a one-click node launcher or something? So regarding the first question here is, I've already mentioned it, so the Bittrex integration is not live yet. It's in the works. So at this moment, we still are in the process of development. When we look at the second question, this is really a kind of a user experience question. So having a very good user experience for both the node holders and the companies is something that's very important. And in a way, we are trying to increase the sort of to lessen the friction and make it more easy to install the node. But the thing is, there's only so much you can do with decentralized technology. So providing a one-click install is, in a way, we came a long way towards that already, because we are keeping up-to-date Docker instances that anyone can use. So that's really not that complicated to install. And then having Houston, that actually is a nice interface that you can use to communicate with the node, which is also going to be updated, by the way. The thing there is, if it were a one-click install, then the thing there is we, in a way, start cannibalizing, I might say, decentralization itself. Because decentralization comes with some sort of a responsibility your tokens. So, and in that sense, if there's one authority that would be this one-click install place where you could go and do it and start getting tokens, then who is really in charge of this node, and who is really in charge of the tokens, and in generally the whole system? So in that sense, there's only so much we can do. So there's a limit to how great the UX, how simple the UX can be. It's still a very technical product and involves some technical knowledge. It's important to be able to understand how it works. So in that sense, I'm not saying that we are not looking for making it easier, but to a point where it will be one click on, let's say, some website, that's something that the team doesn't really focus on. I'm not saying that it cannot be done. Someone might provide such a service, maybe someone from the community. And that's perfectly fine. The important aspect to note there is that that also means certain things that might or might not be against the whole idea of decentralization, which is one of the value propositions of the protocol itself. So the team is really focusing on building the decentralized protocol work well, to optimize it, to tailor it towards companies, of course, to make it work well for node holders, but not to necessarily go into making it so that my grandma can use it, because she won't be able to understand, at least my grandma won't, at this moment, how the actual cryptocurrency space works, and therefore what it means to keep your wallets, to do key management, to actually work with your management wallet and what it does and what your operational wallet does, and so on. So therefore, some complexity is always going to be there if you want to govern your node and do the actual implementation the way it was supposed to be done. Okay, will Ethereum 2.0 sharding drastically change the architecture of what's in place today for the ODN, or will it be a simple upgrade when the time comes to upgrade to support it? This is a very good question. Basically, the architecture itself of the protocol will be minimally affected. So the idea is that the protocol was designed in such a way that the blockchain performs, well, very relatively simple operations on blockchain. What will happen then, we really support the Ethereum team in their efforts, is that scale will increase, that potentially speed will increase, and hopefully price will also go down with it. So in that sense, we are not expecting any drastic architectural changes. We're closely following what's happening in the Ethereum 2.0 developments and research, and it's actually very inspiring. So we're planning upgrades in time, and it's not gonna get to a point where we need to drastically re-engineer the whole system. That's what was the plan from the initial design of the protocol as well. Okay. Technology-wise, you guys are way ahead of the curve. Oh, thank you. I think the pace of your adoption is slow for this space, and anything you can do to increase that with tangible results to show increasing use of the network will be crucial at this point to build a strong community support. Consider showcasing small but visible pilots and share the progress. That is, first of all, a compliment. Thank you for the compliment. It's also a good point. So we are, in the following months, we'll try to showcase as much of the pilots and new projects as we can. And basically that means when we get green light from the partner companies that are implementing it. We'll also be refurbishing the website, so it's going to be much easier to find information, either on the tech itself or on the way the tech is used. And but in general, that is the focus of this period. The focus is completely on adoption. So the idea is to bring the technology to the companies and not try and be in the mode where we constantly try to follow a specific roadmap that we put in place some time ago, and then the market showed us that we could actually take a quicker route. So the idea there is to completely go this route. We want to show as much as we can, as soon as we can, as soon as we're able to. Okay, I think that's the last question. Yeah, that's the last question on this list that was upvoted. Yeah, so I can go ahead and look at. We can just go ahead and finalize that demo over there. But I hope this actually gives you a better look at how the protocol is developing, what is it works. Yeah, we can see that the offer has been finalized, and let me just open up here it is. So in the interface, if I refresh this, let me just try and load the full graph again. I should be able to see that the other connector has been connected, if you remember what I was trying to show before. So let's try again. Okay, it's a little bit hard to find sometimes in this interface because it's, let me just zoom in. Okay, having issues with my browser. Maybe it's because of the sharing of the screen. But essentially, we see the connector we saw before, and then there, the other connector, there's another lingering connector. I'm trying to find the one that I was looking for in the beginning, certificate data. I believe I need to reload the graph. Okay. But essentially what we're looking for is to see that the connections between different data sets have been formed, and that these different data sets, actually, let me open up a data set while this loads, how these data sets look like. So I can just go ahead and open up a data set here, one of them, just so you can see them. Okay, demo. So for example, this was the farm XML, and this is a standardized GS1 EPCIX XML with a standardized header, so that actually talks about the movement of goods in the supply chain. This is a certificate, basically JSON, OT JSON in a way, stripped one without the metadata and the signatures that actually show, that get created by the node itself, by the way, that actually show a certain certification by a certain certificate authority regarding this node. This can be an output of any sort of file that gets translated into JSON, and then sensor data is basically just in this way an example of Raspberry Pi measurement of temperature and humidity. And basically that is something that, if you remember, fits into the Web of Things standard that has been supported by the protocol. So all these three data sets essentially end up being in the same graph here. And what the actual node does, and let me just open Swagger. What you would then, as a developer, do is you could traverse this graph and basically find any path by using the trail call. So the trail call would, for example, look for a specific identifier of a specific type with a specific value, and it can actually say, okay, I'm looking for certain depth in the graph, and I'm looking for certain connection types. So maybe I'm looking for a parent product, EPC, electronic product code. So in that sense, many different things for many different applications can be supported now because of this new version of the trail call, which returns actually the graph, the vertices, edges, and proofs for each of the data sets that have been involved in this graph. So just to once more underline, this can be any path in this graph. It's an arbitrary path, so it can traverse multiple data sets, and therefore for each of these paths, because they're always a subset of a data set, a corresponding proof is also sent, so that you can actually check that this part of the data belongs to a certain data set that has been fingerprinted on the blockchain. So that is the general idea. And okay, I guess that's enough for the demo for now. We'll publish all these documents actually in the coming period, and we will keep you guys updated. Thank you for all the questions. Once again, I want to invite everyone from the community who is interested in contributing to technology and generally contributing to solutions to give us a shout out. Come to our channels. We're very open to not only suggestions, but having contributors. So if anyone has a good idea or wants to work together with us, hit us up on Discord or GitHub, and let's work together. Let's make this happen faster and get the adoption sooner. Yeah, I guess that's enough for me from today. Thank you, everyone, and trace on.